True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. Apologies for being a few minutes late this morning. Had to get to, of course, I've got my pancakes and then having to get some things together for this show and found out a few things. Wanted to follow up on them before I presented. So, been working hard to get this show together, and I truly appreciate your patience waiting for a few minutes here. I know your time is valuable, so thanks for being here. Want to start off and talk just a little bit about, before we get into the main substance of the case, I want to talk about these individuals that came to the house yesterday. This is actually a photo from News Nation, and then I posted on my Twitter actually a small 10-second reel from John DePietro, who I think a lot of. He's a journalist, just a private journalist, and think a lot of him. He has been out there, started a little late, but he's out there nonstop now. So I've really enjoyed his coverage, very professional. But I wanted to talk about these people. Everybody's speculating, what are they? Locksmith. No. This is what I think. And this makes a lot of sense to me. Whenever, and I talked about this a long time ago, probably 2 weeks ago, I said, where are the people to get the crime scene cleaned up? In other words, there are special biohazard cleaners that actually specialize in this type of cleanup. And it's a very difficult, obvious job. I've seen a lot of people that were in regular cleanup and they moved into this area of cleanup. As far as certifications or specialties, you are supposed to have some, but basically they go in and they clean up blood and any other sort of bodily fluids from different crime scenes. And I truly believe these guys might have been there to evaluate how in the world we were going to clean this blood off the stairs. Are they going to remove bricks? Are they going to, do they have anything that can penetrate? Remember, bricks are extremely porous. And I know this because, and I'm sure many of you who have brickwork around your house, boy, if you get anything on those bricks, whether it be, as an example, something that hits our bricks a lot are sort of this residue from oak trees, from the oak things that fall, pine needles, any of that. It could take forever to get that pine resin, if you will, and the oak serum. I don't know what else to call it. It penetrates your brick and it can stand there a very long time. And then some you just can't get rid of. So I think they are looking at, are they going to do a whole reconstruct? Are they going to put down all new bricks, tear those up? I wouldn't be surprised to see that. That is very much what I think they'll do, is tear out those bricks and they'll lay down new brickwork. But what I found most interesting about them, if I'm correct on this, is that they entered the house and, worked other areas around the house, which makes me wonder what other bio fluids might exist in other parts of the house. So that was the first thing that came to me. This is very much in keeping with what I've seen and sort of the evaluation that needs to be done preliminarily before either construction or cleanup can be done. So anyway, that's my belief. And again, for me, the big notation from that is, wow, they were there for about an hour and they went into the house. And so all of that, I think, is pretty concerning in terms of what other biohazards might be in and around that home that we just haven't been able to lay eyes on. Want to talk a lot about here. Well, really quick, one other thing. And I'm going to post one of Savannah's posts from her Instagram. And I wanted to read the note that the family left. This was really poignant. I actually put that scene within probably 10 minutes of News Nation grabbing it on one of those reels I do. It's just a quick kind of tries to draw the attention to it breaking, and then it'll break into the actual clip. I realize on this one I should have just done the clip, because the clip is so poignant of seeing Savannah there with Annie. A lot of people speculated and wrote throughout media. I couldn't believe it, mainstream and social media, that was Cameron there, which is the brother, but it wasn't. That was Tommaso that was there. And it was very heartfelt. There was a lot of crying, sobbing, holding, hugging. They brought flowers and a note. It was, I mean, can you imagine how cathartic I think this would all be? So cathartic to kind of be facing. You have to face it every day, but then as something like a memorial is seen in front of your mom's house that you grew up with, that has been in the family 50 years, it would be so cathartic and I think emotionally traumatizing to sort of somehow face these realizations. So I just wanted to read the note that was written. Though we are surrounded by so much darkness and uncertainty, our love burns bright. We love you, Mommy. We miss you so much. We love you, Mommy. Miss you so much. So a lot of people have talked about the fact that actually Annie used the word mama. And we've also seen Savannah use the word mommy. Now, a lot of people say that's childlike and so on. I could tell you, my adult kids, my daughter, especially if she's going through a hard time, if we're talking about something and there's a particular closeness during that conversation, she often calls me mommy. I actually love it because, of course, it takes me back to the time pre-teens when they always called me mommy, clip until they're about 13. And then, well, we know what happens when they turn 13. So certainly they break off into their independence. And then my son has almost always called me mama. He calls me mom, but whenever it's an affectionate type of situation or moment, he'll say mama. And so I just wanted to say, for those of you who might, because I saw that called out kind of strange or childlike or unrelatable, it's really not unrelatable in my opinion. It depends on your relationship with your family and parent, not that one's worse than the other, but some just have such a very close type of relationship in this way. And so, I don't know about you all, but I have nicknames for each of my children. I've seldom, if ever, called them their real names. In fact, I would say 99% of the time I call them by their nicknames. And it's just a sign of affection. And then they return with mommy or mama often. So anyway, I just wanted to address that because I saw that on a show, sort of some people intimating that was weird. And I just don't think it's weird. I think it's an emotional outlay. All right. But the heart of our show today, and I really want to get down to this, the heart of the show is on the recent NBC interview with Sheriff Nanos. And I'm actually going to reach out to Sheriff Nanos. I've been very surprised at my ability to get through to the PIO. And I really want to see if there's any way he'll give me an interview. I have so many questions, and I know they're questions that have often been asked by others. But nevertheless, I would love to talk to him. Why? First of all, I understand that a lot of public confidence has been truly lost in what Sheriff Nanos has to say. I understand that. But at the end of the day, that is our nexus to understand what is going on behind the scenes, what is going on in the war room, what's going on with investigators and with FBI agents, with the details and the facts of this case. And he had some real nuggets, I thought, for NBC that he said. So anytime I see that he has made a public presser like this, I'm going to come on and go through what he has to say. What's interesting is I'm sort of surprised that this hasn't made the media more. And what I've come to realize, whether it's in social media, whether it's on different YouTube channels or whatever, there's sort of a mystique that I think if somebody decides to make, and obviously Sheriff Nanos has had a lot of missteps, that basically it's sort of a group think that no matter what he says is just can't trust it. And I understand that mentality, but I also believe that that's our only set of eyes and ears into what's happening. So I think it's very important to listen to anybody who comes forward, whether it's the PIO, if the FBI obviously gives any sort of presser, that's going to be widely covered. But the FBI, again, does not care what the public thinks. I just want to be crystal clear about that. That is not perception, and all of that just is not on their radar. If you look at the Gabby Petito case, you'll recall, nothing, crickets. So until the end, and there was that press conference, and we learned a lot. But nevertheless, I think it's important. So we're going to touch on all of these. So some of the stuff the sheriff said, and I want to go back to a Channel 12 interview that happened before the NBC interview, and nobody's really talking much about that either. But there was one particular thing, and he talked about, and I know we've already touched on it and it's happened, is the relocation of assets. And he kind of played that off as, listen, there's other security issues we have to worry about right now. There's lots of other issues going on. And I totally believe that. Something nobody has really talked about much, and I'm going to talk about it. There are, according to what they said, 100 FBI agents assigned to this investigation. What does that mean? Well, and to me, this is huge. And this happens throughout history and throughout investigations. I'll tell you a big time when it happened. After 9/11, all of us that were working organized crime, violent crime, all of that went on hold. We literally had to put some of our cases in what we call pending and active status, which you never want to do on a case. When you have a case assigned, you want to be constantly working on some aspect of it. Even if you have 50 cases assigned, you need to relegate, what am I going to do today? What's my priorities and so forth. But you're constantly working on them, and you're judged on that. That's how you're evaluated as an FBI agent. What are you producing in your cases? Not your case, your cases. So I think it's really important to understand that these 100 FBI agents were saddled with, or not saddled, but were investigating multiple cases of their own. If you were on a violent crime squad, you literally could have hundreds of cases, because bank robberies, every bank robbery is a federal case. So even though that's worked with the locals, and oftentimes they are taking the full-on lead, you open up that case and have it open, because in the case, particularly if there was a gun used or other situations arise, because it's under federal jurisdiction, you will go ahead and end up taking that case and having it adjudicated federally, because typically sentencing guidelines in federal cases are much stiffer, and they serve 85% of their time. Whereas when you adjudicate locally, oftentimes, even though the numbers sound big, they serve far less time. And so in those cases, that's why you have all those cases assigned, particularly on violent crime. But nevertheless, you also have a ton of violent crime cases, because there's so much violent crime that goes on. So I'm just trying to say, I don't know the caseload of these agents, but I can tell you it's heavy. It's not one or two cases. These agents likely have dozens of cases assigned to them. And They have particular cases, maybe their top 3 or 4 that they're working on and really striving to solve and to get down the road in terms of adjudicating. Those cases right now are on hold. Nobody's talking about this, but that's big. And that happened too with the Pima County Sheriff's officers. They had cases, they have patrolling responsibility, they have responsibilities to react to other home invasions, to other burglaries, to robberies, to, traffic, DUIs, all these huge breadth of responsibilities that the locals have. So anyway, during that interview, he said, listen, it's not that we're not involved, and we know that they have certain officers that they have on this task force that's responsible for investigating Nancy's case now. But they have pulled off a lot of their officers back, relocating them to what they did to help make the Pima County safe and to help investigate other cases. Because remember, especially this has been going on now 32 days, cases that would normally be jumped on, normally worked, normally responded to, I'm quite sure that had either no response or a lesser response. For anybody driving around drunk, that was probably the best time to be doing it, was the prior 32 days, because my belief would be that their officers were so entangled and told that this was going to be their number one priority and pulled off of those types of duties. Nevertheless, these 100 FBI agents are, of course, still have their cases sidelined. I don't know for sure at this point. That was the original number given. I don't know whether they have scaled down, but we know they've gone to the Phoenix office, which, as I explained before, the Phoenix office is a huge office. They're called field officers. The field offices, there's 56 of them in the United States, and they are the large offices that have typically hundreds of FBI agents, even about double to triple of that in support staff, which are secretarial, filing, analytical, forensic analysis, the guys behind the scene that are doing a lot of the work, but they're not in the field. They're behind the scenes at computers handling work. So whenever that happens, to me, that means that the breadth of that analytical squad now, they're not agents, they're analysts. Those analysts are concentrating on the review of all of the video and the review of all of the digital information. They're tracking all of that, and it's taking so many people. And like in the Idaho 4 case, that was spread to multiple field offices where they assisted, their analysts assisted. So you can bet that that's happening here as well. Now, I just wanted to point out that the toll on any office, the toll on a law enforcement entity is very great. And it's just something I hadn't even heard mentioned, but it's very great. And on the 12th, or in that Channel 12 interview, he talked about that a little bit. But let me look at and I have multiple points here, at points that he made. And I always like kind of to decipher exactly sometimes what he's saying beneath what he's saying, at least from my opinion here. He was very specific that they were getting closer to an arrest, closer to solving the case, I think is the actual words he used, words to that effect. And to be closer, if I were to say that, that means to me, I at least have some idea who might be involved in this. That's what that means to me. In other words, if you don't have anybody on your radar, how can you be closer to getting a case adjudicated and to bringing somebody who might be responsible for this case forward? So I just see that when he uses these words closer, if we're to believe him, it would seem to me that the FBI and Pima County and the other people on the task force are getting closer to not only identifying who might be involved, but to making a case. That's what I hear from that. He could just be saying that to alleviate concerns. It certainly sounds better than, listen, we have no idea who's done it. We need your help. But oftentimes law enforcement will say that. Listen, right now we're following a million leads, but honestly, we don't have any focus. We don't have anybody. But the fact he used those words closer, if we are to believe him, that could have been very significant. Again, this interview took place March 2nd. It was done by NBC's Liz Kreutz. I hope I'm saying that right. Kreutz. And again, that interview was done the same day the card and the flower from the family and the family visited. This is a picture posted by Savannah right here. All right. I want to talk about, because this has really been burning for me, is this vehicle that was reportedly seen 2.5 miles. Not reportedly, we all saw it. It was seen, I posted it here several times, it was seen racing across about 2.5 miles away. Very early on, within about 5 to 6 hours, TMZ reported that their source reporting said it's not relevant. A lot of people said, well, how could anybody make that decision so quickly? And I tried to point out, first of all, the numbers of this, all the analysts and FBI agents on this. If they were able to pull a partial tag, in other words, you expedite that to Quantico. At Quantico, you're working with an analyst who then uses lighting measures and makes it more crisp. You get that plate. That plate then goes back to a registration that person's talked to, and they say, listen, I commute every day, this time of day. I get off work at 2 o'clock, and this is me commuting home. And they verified where they live, and sure enough, that's the fact. So things can happen that quickly, especially in important cases that are elevated at the level this has been elevated. You can see this sort of quick response. So anyway, that's source reporting from TMZ. Then later, we saw a local station report that this might not be dead. This car that raced by might not be a dead end. So I want to tell you what Chris Nanos says about this. So he says that the car 2.5 miles away, he says, of course, they're aware of it. He says they're looking into it. But this was the piece, the nugget, is he says they haven't ID'd that car. So if they haven't ID'd that car, that makes that source reporting very suspect that it was eliminated. Really does, because if we're to believe Chris Nanos, he says they haven't identified that car. And then he goes on to say something a little bit even more explosive. He goes on to say that there are, these are the exact words, hundreds of thousands of other vehicles they are looking at. And that's where I talked about these analysts. It's not going to be the agents that are sitting there looking at this. When they find something, they're going to let the agent that's sort of responsible for that area, they're going to be notified. But this is something that these analysts who are so good, they're going to be sitting behind their keyboards watching. You can barely even work away. You've got to pause it if you need to take a drink or whatever, because 1 second can be important, depending on if they're watching it in slower motion or faster motion. But there's a lot for them to look at. So when he says hundreds of thousands, it's clear to me that they are looking at any and all red light video, stoplight video in that area, because those traffic cams can catch so much. And then they're also looking at, of course, all of that video Ring Nest sent in from local residents that are like, here, I think this could be important. This was the right timing. So a lot to look at. But I guess what the most important thing I gleaned from that is that maybe that, or at least according to him, this is what he said, that vehicle wasn't identified, that particular video. and that we saw from that neighbor that, well, I call him a neighbor, from that resident that lived 2.5 miles away. So, but the way he kind of threw it in there made it seem like it's just as important as the other tens of thousands of vehicles that we're looking at. In other words, it seems to me that that is a needle in a haystack, everything they're looking at with that. And they're hoping for that break. But right now, it's just tens of thousands of vehicles they're looking at that could possibly be important. I thought it was interesting how he immediately, and I've seen this in also the PIO for Pima County said the same thing, basically, is that this is just a part of all these thousands of other vehicles we're looking at. So I thought that that was really, really critical there to point out that it doesn't seem like this vehicle that was 2.5 miles away is being distinguished, you know, like the full court press. Hey, anyone and everyone in that area that has other camera footage next to this house, can you come forward? You know, anything like that. We're not hearing any sort of pleas that way. So take that for what you will, but to me, how I'm taking it is that this vehicle isn't any more important than all the other vehicles they're looking at in that time window, right? In the time window that, first of all, could have been around Annie and Tommaso's house if she was followed from there, and the time window of going to Annie Guthrie's house, and then the time window of leaving. I'm sorry, Nancy Guthrie's house and leaving Nancy Guthrie's house. Okay, moving on. He said something that I thought was very interesting about the clothing. He said, they have not ID'd the clothing. It was really subtle because, and then he said, we haven't ID'd the clothing. That's big because a lot of people believe they had ID'd it. The backpack's been ID'd, and it makes a lot of sense to me because to me, if they had the clothing, the shoes, the pants, that jacket, if that was ID'd just like they did with the backpack, they would have come forward and they would have said, listen, we have this all ID'd. Be looking for somebody you work with, somebody who you might know that wears this particular brand or these pants or these shoes. So he basically acknowledged that they don't have that ID'd. There's been a lot of speculation about what jacket that was, but it seems to me that even with the FBI's ability to enhance videos and photographs and the likelihood that law enforcement is working with something much more crisp in terms of being able to see from porch guy, that they haven't ID'd that. So I thought that was big. Okay, this was big. He acknowledges that that backpack, while it's exclusively sold at Walmart, and we've all talked about this before, by the way, that backpack wasn't necessarily sold to him at Walmart. And remember, they're working with corporate to go through basically all receipts for that backpack. I don't know what time window they took. I would have probably taken 2 years, which would be crazy, at least in that Tucson area, because I still think who's ever responsible, that likely it was from that Tucson area, but that they understand that it could have been sold through, meaning law enforcement, and that maybe it was, they're tracking this, that it could have been sold through a third party. And I thought a lot about this, and I don't know how many of you on here are familiar with Mercari, eBay, but not just eBay for big things, but eBay when it comes to clothes. Those are the two big ones I can think of. Those are the two that I use. So as an example, I was looking for a specific sweatshirt from a specific high school, and I wondered if eBay would have it. I couldn't believe. I go on there and eBay had this particular sweatshirt from this particular high school, the one exactly one that I liked. And you could say, well, why didn't you want to go to what they had? Well, they didn't have it in orange anymore. So I was looking for an older one. And sure enough, eBay had it. but it was expensive. These aren't items typically with Macari, which also sells clothes like this, or eBay. I can't think of any others that just jump off at me because these are the ones I use when I'm looking for a particular kind of clothes. Um, they're typically things that are more expensive. So, in other words, the person selling it at Macari or eBay, if you're starting off with a cheap backpack that's $10 at Walmart, no one is going to go, for the most part, on eBay and Macari, something like that, and say, oh, wow, maybe I can get this backpack that's old and used for $2. So that didn't really make a lot of sense to me unless this person was just trying to separate themselves from Walmart. But the problem with that is the seller, because the seller typically pays the postage. Sometimes they can have but who would do that for this cheap backpack? Going to a third party vendor. So that's what jumped out to me, to be honest with you, is him talking about third party vendors. And I hope they're thinking about this. I hope they're dealing or being advised by people who use these third parties as to how it works and how you can make money. And the fact that typically, I'm not saying always, but typically people on those sites are looking for Lululemon, Athleta. They're looking for, a hiking shoe that is expensive that maybe somebody wore once or didn't wear at all because it was given as a gift and it's a size and a half too small, whatever it might be. So it made me just wonder what would make them think that this person would use a third party vendor to buy a cheap old backpack. Does that strike any? I'm going to look at comments. Does that strike anyone else as odd? Because it's odd. I'm telling you, it's odd that they would be spending resources and time looking down that road unless there was something that makes them think because of some other purchase or something else that they tracked that led them to third-party sites. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. It's not tracking with me. Let's see. Oh, this was huge, huge, huge. He said that this was the biggest take. The DNA in the house could be the suspects, and that it could be a mixture of actually more than 2 different profiles. That was big, everyone, that they are tracking, law enforcement is tracking this as being actual. So it really makes me wonder, where was this? Was it in the bedroom that it was found? Was it where? Because to me, that means it was found someplace important. I've always said they spent so much time, or at least we only have seen Porch Guy. Many of us believe there was somebody else involved, but did the person eat? Did the person eat? People eat. Look at the Manson killers. They massacred people and then decided to sit down and raid the icebox. I talked to you about the 80-year-old person that a friend of mine is working on investigating. That's why he can't come on here, because the cases are similar. 80-year-old that was kidnapped, and they ate pizza, which helped link that bad guy to the crime. He sat there and ate pizza in the midst of abducting this 80-year-old woman. So it makes me so hopeful, everyone. Obviously, they've got to use IgG. It was a failure in CODIS, purportedly because it didn't have enough markers. And then you read about IgG, and you can have fewer markers than CODIS would require, but it takes a lot of things happening that have to be right. In other words, multiple profiles that would be related to the person. So in other words, instead of just you going forward and wanting to know your ancestry, your brother, your sister, a cousin, a third cousin, a nephew 10 steps removed, all those people that could triangulate toward a particular profile when you don't have very many markers on the DNA. So, but I just thought it was great, and it made me wonder what the vehicle for the DNA was. Was it blood? Was it semen? Which I really doubt. Could be. Was it saliva? Was it sweat? What could have emanated from him or the other person? Was there touch DNA on the gloves where they applied the gloves, and then that was somehow deposited because of everything they would have touched in there? Anyway, we don't know, but I have this glimmer of hope. If we're to believe Chief Nanos, I have this glimmer of hope because this means that at least he believes, if not others, that DNA could solve this case, like in the Brian Koberger case. So that was really big. Let's see. He didn't, the interview about the gloves and what they had to say about that didn't seem like it was near important, which I think most of us realized. It was a mile plus away. It was shot in the dark, but the gloves were similar to those used. Anyway, he seemed to sort of write that off and really try to point out that the DNA in the house is much more important. So I think we can really hold on to that as being a possibility. Let me see, I have 2 more things here, or 3 more things. The holster. He pointed out that holster was really unique. That's important because if it's unique, maybe they can track that, everyone. Maybe that is another, we've all talked about that you're sort of triangulating all these things, right? The backpack, the holster, the shirt, if you can identify it, the clothes, the shoes. It looks like 2 different shoes in the 2 different times we see the individual, which of course lends itself to that source reporting that it was on a different day. That combined with the dark backdrop, although we have to remember it could have been a different person. We can't just rule that out, although, the sources say that it's not. So I think that is really important. He confirmed that it does look like the pinky ring on the finger. So again, people in the public that are thinking this person might be important, men, not that many men wear pinky rings. I mean, yes, thousands do, but compared to those who don't, and when you consider all the other things, the well-marked backpack, how he liked to dress, the shoes he liked to wear, the eyebrows, the mustache, the distance between the mouth and the lips and the nose. When you look at all of that and then say, wow, he also wore a pinky ring. And I believe possibly had those 2-way radios, which are walkie-talkies. There's so much to go on here for somebody who actually really knows him. But he confirmed that he also believed that. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. He did talk about how that there's so much more information, which we've talked about here. There's so much more information, but obviously he can't share it. As a responsible member of law enforcement, it would be wrong to share inside information that could possibly, compromise the case. And so for that reason, he's not sharing, and he talks about that. And that's the right call. But boy, did he give us a lot of clues here, I thought. Again, if we are to believe him, and to me, he's the one that has the information. So for other people that are on air, on social media and so forth, that are just sitting around speculating, I think it's good to have brick and mortar statements that we can use, at least when we're making educated hypothesis about what happened and so forth. And this DNA, to me, if I could leave you all with anything, that's the big one to come away with. Everyone, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you being part of the morning report. I wanted to tell you 2 amazing shows coming out. I have been working for 3 weeks since pretty much close to after this Nancy was taken to get Greg McCrary. Greg McCrary, again, partners with John Douglas, one of the original FBI profilers. I've had him on twice before to talk about John Benet Ramsey and a couple of other cases. And then I also had him on to talk about the school shooting involving one of the shooters that was transgender, because I thought his point of view on that was great. Plus, I hate to go to the well too many times, and I like to spread it out because he's extremely, extremely expensive. He's an expert witness. Obviously, he's a mentor of mine, so he's doing our show without a charge. He's absolutely amazing. I hope you can join us. It's going to be 9 o'clock Friday, and we're going to cut up this case. So I'm looking forward to that. Then we are also going, I'm hoping for Monday, but I'm waiting for the exact date. I spoke with Joe Magliolo. He is a 40-year prosecutor, spent decades with the Assistant United States Attorney's Office. I had the honor and absolute pleasure of working many of my organized crime cases with him. He was amazing to work with. One of those just smart, you guys are going to love him. He's kind of like a cross, well, he's kind of like a Columbo. His name's Joe Magliolo, if you want to look him up. Just an amazing career prosecutor, and honored that he is excited to do the show. He's got a couple kidnapping cases he wants to talk about, and kind of how that, what he learned from those cases. And then, of course, we're going to talk about Nancy's case. So anyway, can't wait to have these gentlemen on, working on a couple of other guests that are going to be great as well. Everyone, thanks for being here. I appreciate y'all so much. And until next time, may justice be served for Nancy Guthrie and for all the victims of the missing, I should say.